Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. The Traveling Salesman, Part 2. The day started off normal enough. After my recent financial windfall from business dealings with an alien traveling salesman named Glactyl, I was enjoying myself in my new oceanside mansion in Malibu. As I finished a shower, following an invigorating swim in the Pacific on my private beach, I stepped out of my spacious bathroom into my bedroom suite and found myself facing a strange, frumpy-looking woman wearing a particularly ugly sundress. Jumping backward while hurriedly trying to cover myself with my towel, I screamed, "What the Who the hell are you?" The woman did not react. She simply stood there, staring at me with her head tilted to one side, as if studying me. I started to yell at her again, but then realized that there was only one person who had that unusual mannerism. Someone who also never behaved as you would expect them to. Staring intently back at her, I said, "Glactyl? Is that you?" "Ah, my friend," replied my alien business partner. "I am disappointed that my new disguise did not deceive you. I was hoping this new appearance would be more effective than my last one." Squinting at him, I tried to figure out how he had managed to look so different from the last time we'd met. Holding my towel around my waist with one hand, I tentatively reached out to touch his face, but he pulled away. "How do you make your disguises?" I asked. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the small device he had shown me once before and said, "Oh, my Unitool can also project realistic holographic images. With it, I can assume virtually any shape or form." Stuffing it back into a pocket, he continued, saying, "In any case, I see that you took my advice and spent your portion of our recent profits on suitable amenities and lodgings." I grabbed a pair of pants and took them with me. As I stepped back into my bathroom and half closed the door. As I started dressing, I called out, saying, "Yeah, the $10 million that I got from our last venture has come in handy. But what are you doing here? I wasn't expecting you for at least another month or two." Now wearing trousers, I stepped back into the room and continued dressing, pulling clothes from my nearby walk-in closet. "Ah, well," he said, "things have been moving quite quickly and I'm already in need of your assistance." "Okay," I responded. "What do you need? Have you got another fancy item to sell?" "Actually, more like a dozen items this time. To complete my plans by this time next year, I will need to have increased our $100 million investment 100-fold by turning it into $10 billion. However, in order to do that, I need you, but you will require some additional help this time. That's why I need you to fly to New York to meet tomorrow with the board of directors of an advertising company that I just purchased." "An advertising company? How'd you do that?" "It was quite easy, and it represented an opportunity that I simply could not pass up. The company, the Parado Group, used to be the 5th largest advertiser on the East Coast, but it fell on hard times late last year. It appears there was a rather nasty scandal that involved their CEO, 5 unauthorized mansions, and as many mistresses, along with the disappearance of significant funds. Following some particularly nasty press, many of their clients abandoned the company, and Parado started experiencing some financial difficulties. Their CEO finally stepped down, but not before securing a very sizable severance package, whereupon the stock in the company plummeted. As the enterprise floundered on the edge of bankruptcy, I managed to purchase enough stocks to ensure a majority share in Parado. Now, we will have all the resources that we need to promote and sell the next dozen products that I will be trading here on Earth. But you need to hurry," he said. "The board is expecting a detailed briefing by you tomorrow afternoon, so you need to make all the arrangements to get there in time." "But," I stammered, "I don't know what to say. I'll need more time." "Oh, that's not a problem. I've written a script for you and provided a formal presentation." Tossing a thick folder of papers onto the nearby bed, he added, "Just study it and you'll be fine." Before I could protest further, he said, "Oh, you still have that communication earbud that I gave you last time, don't you?" Thinking quickly, I replied, yeah, somewhere." Then I glanced around, trying to remember where I might have put it. "Good," he said. "I will use it to contact you again after you arrive in New York." Then he simply disappeared. One second he was standing in front of me, and the next he vanished in the blink of an eye, with nothing more than an audible popping sound. Shaking my head, I thought to myself, of course, teleportation. I swear, I'm never going to read science fiction ever again. Reluctantly, I sat on my bed and picked up the folder to start studying my lines. While I was ostensibly the new owner of the company, I found it quite intimidating standing in front of the 8 members of the Parado Board of Directors. All were older men who were either white-haired or bald, except for the new chairman of the board, a stern woman named Evelyn DeSantos. She scowled and reminded me of a former teacher I had once back in middle school. Her gaze was quite intense, and she appeared to be squinting at me. Her formal black attire seemed more suitable for a funeral than a business, and she had her hair pulled back in what looked like a painfully tight bun. As we began introducing ourselves, she smiled. What frightened me the most was that her smile did not lessen the intensity of her withering glare, in the slightest. Evelyn was the first to speak, but I really didn't listen too closely to her, because Glactyl chose that moment to speak to me through my hidden earpiece. "She is quite angry," whispered Glactyl. "How can you tell?" I replied sarcastically. "Because I'm reading her mind," he replied. "Remember, I have a device that does that." "What? You can read minds all the way from your ship?" "No, of course not. I'm only a few feet away. I'm standing in an empty office immediately below the boardroom. I took a position here in case you needed my support." "Okay, well, thanks." "I should probably tell you why she is mad. It seems she has worked for this company more than 20 years, and they only made her the CEO as a token gesture to some of their clients, following the recent scandal. She is quite resentful of everyone in this room, but her ire is currently focused entirely on you." "Great," I muttered to myself. Talk about a hostile audience. As painful as the situation was, I actually felt sorry for her. I was only visiting here. She was the one who had to live here. It must be tough. At that point, Evelyn finished her prepared remarks. She had been explaining at length about the distinguished history of the company, ignoring, of course, the past year of turmoil. I paused and reconsidered what I should say. It was at this point in Glactyl's script that I was supposed to enumerate the weaknesses of the business, the lost clients, the diminished reputation, and their poor financial prospects, and how I was the only one who was going to fix it all. However, I realized that they already knew everything I was scheduled to say, and all I would be doing would be rubbing salt in open wounds. Therefore, I took an entirely different approach. "Thank you, Evelyn. I know my coming in like this must be hard on you." Gesturing at the entire board, I added, "On all of you. But I don't want to make things harder on you than things already are." "You're deviating from your prepared lines," coaxed Glactyl. "I know," I replied silently. "Just trust me." "Like it or not," I continued, "my partners and I are now as invested in this company as the rest of you. I'm not here to take over or to tell you how to do your jobs. I represent a consortium of scientists, engineers, and inventors who have banded together to market and promote our products, and for that, we need your help. I don't want to interfere with you too much. You are the experts in advertising, marketing, and distribution. On the other hand, we are the experts on the new products that you will need to represent. Beyond the need to promote these products, you are at complete liberty to run your business as you wish. If there is anything I can do to help, just let me know." "But you have demands for us, don't you?" said Evelyn, in an almost accusatory tone. "Yes," I replied. "After investing nearly $100 million in this company, I most certainly have some specific expectations and requests." "Like what?" she retorted. "Well," I replied, First of all, there is this. At that point, I pulled out a small iPod and hit the play button. As everyone listened, soft musical notes began to play. The notes were not a tune as much as the hint of a tune. The tones were spaced relatively far apart from each other, sometimes with a second or more between them. It finished in less than a minute, and when it was done, it started over. "And this is supposed to be?" asked one of the other directors. "This is one of the things the scientists on our team discovered. After conducting years of research and detailed analysis of the human brain, and by analyzing what portions of the brain are activated by different tones and patterns, my research teams have come up with this. It is a sequence of tones that increase cognitive susceptibility in human subjects." "Human?" asked Evelyn. "Yes, we've tested this on primates as well, but this series of notes only works on people. Essentially, the notes affect the brain in a way that increases the suggestibility of those listening to them. The tonal sequence lasts for about 30 seconds, but the effect lasts for about 3 minutes. The researchers and engineers who developed this called it a sub-rosa auditory suggestibility facilitator. I simply call it the compeller. Patent pending, of course." "What are we supposed to do with this?" asked another board member. "I want you to use it, but only on the products that I'll be providing you to market." "How are we supposed to do that?" "Well, the tones can be accompanied by other sounds. You can turn it into a song, or a jingle, or a tune. Place it in the background of a commercial, or work it into some other melody. I guarantee that, if you play it, the sales on the associated products will increase by up to 20%. "You're crazy," said someone. "No, I'm very serious," I replied. "It's illegal," said someone else. "Not really. While subliminal messaging has been illegal in the US, UK, and Australia since 1958, there's no such thing as subliminal messaging. The only research to claim it ever worked was published in 1957, but it was later shown that the authors of that study faked their results, and no one was ever able to duplicate their experiments. However, you are correct. The law still remains on the books, but there's never been a case filed that even relates to that law. No one has ever been prosecuted, convicted, or even charged. Anyway, using this isn't delivering a message. It's just a smoothing, multitonal auditory sequence that relaxes the mind." A few board members muttered to one another. "Look, it's just a natural consequence of how our minds work. It's not magic or exotic. In fact, it's been discovered several times over history. For instance, a 98% complete segment can be found buried in a complex 8-part figure written for recorder and crumhorn back in the 16th century. Another shorter portion of this sequence can be found in an obscure piece of music played by sitar and sarangi from Nepal about 300 years ago. And the most recent rediscovery of this tonal progression, one that's 80% complete, appears in the riff of a German techno track from the 1990s. This sequence, however, is complete and will maximize the effect on listeners." "In any case," I said, "tell me how using this is different from the objective of any other normal advertising, which is simply to influence people's buying habits." "It's unethical," suggested someone. "Really?" I replied. "That's rich. Since when have advertisers ever been worried about ethics?" No one replied, but after a short silence, I simply shrugged and said, "Besides, I won't tell if you don't." While one of the board members actually chuckled, most of them looked nonplussed, distracted, or uncomfortable. Evelyn, on the other hand, listened intently. I could tell I was getting through to her, and since she represented the heart and soul of the board, it was only a matter of time before I got through to the others. "Tell you what," I said, "just use it on the first 3 products that we ask you to promote and market, and then make your own decisions." The board discussed the merits of such an experiment as the iPod continued to play the tune. I listened to the board argue a bit, and gradually, the arguments dropped off, and the board finally agreed to try it out. I smiled to myself, noting that as the tune continued to play, my proposals were becoming more acceptable to them. Grinning silently to myself, I thought, the board itself is succumbing to the compeller. No one else seemed to notice, But Evelyn didn't seem to be squinting quite as hard at me as she had before. In fact, she slowly started to lean toward taking in the new opportunities I'd been proposing. Finally, I changed the subject and reached into my briefcase for several leather-bound folders, which I handed out ceremoniously. "Here are some documents," I said, "on the first 3 products that we need you to promote, market, and distribute. We're hoping you can begin formal campaigns in about a month. Proposed budgets are provided along with technical specifications. The first 3 include a new form of thermocouple, or as my scientist colleagues insist I call it, a low-frequency vibrational rectenna. Nothing too fancy or over the top. It operates much like a solar cell by generating electricity. However, as you know, the sun isn't always out. But there are some places that are always hot. This device converts molecular vibrations or heats directly into electricity with more than 94% efficiency." One of the white-haired older men opened his leather folder and decided to look at the presentation, as it had suddenly become more interesting. Nodding to him, I said, "I'm glad that appeals to you, but I'm just getting started. The second invention is a spray-on thermal insulator that can withstand an acetylene torch for more than 5 minutes. It is inexpensive and simple to make. We have patents pending on all these items as well. And lastly, we have a brand of shoes that can become completely frictionless. I'm not talking graphene or nanolubricants here. These shoes function more like tiny hoverboards. The surface is diamond smooth and actually breaks the van der Waals forces on underlying surfaces using a vibrational force based on something called acoustic lubrication. Just think of them like ice skates without blades, except that these can even work on concrete. It will make rollerblades and the skateboards obsolete." After that, I answered questions about the products for several minutes until I realized that I'd somehow managed to get them to discuss how to make these products work, rather than arguing why they shouldn't have to. A short while later, I excused myself to allow them to confer privately. As I grabbed my briefcase and headed toward the door, I said, "Again, I don't want to interfere with your operations any more than is absolutely necessary. Just consider me another client who needs your services. My only expectation is that you do your best and that we meet monthly to discuss your progress on our new products. Also, you'll receive roughly 1 new product each month to promote for the remainder of the year. Think of it as a crazy but it works invention of the month club." Several of the old guys smiled. Evelyn looked almost giddy. It was then that I remembered that Glactyl had told me that the compeller had varying effects on different people. Some responded to it more than others. It apparently affected Evelyn more than the other board members. As I left, she actually smiled at me. Without further comment, I left and closed the boardroom door. Hurrying down the hallway, I sighed with relief as I left them all behind. My work, however, wasn't over, since Glactyl had me scheduled to attend 12 other meetings this week alone to set up the manufacturing operations that would be producing some of the products that were going to be submitted to the Parado Group for marketing. As I worked my way through the now-empty factory here in the Caribbean island state of Trinidad and Tobago, I had to weave between stacks of empty wooden pallets and cardboard boxes. "Tell me again why we're here," I called to Glactyl. "You're here to recover the matter duplicator that was used to make the thermocouples that we manufactured earlier this year. In a mere 7 months, more than 50 million of the devices were produced here. Raw materials were delivered to this giant machine, and tiny 1-inch square heat-converting devices were spit out. Supposedly, this monstrous mechanical wonder used a secret manufacturing process to make the mechanisms, but they were really just fabricated by a matter duplicator from my ship. The main bulk of this gigantic machine was really just a facade. Still, we managed to net more than $1 billion on the devices that came from here. Now, however, the product line has been discontinued and everyone has been laid off. The frenzy to obtain these thermocouples created a buying spree, but it didn't last. People found that the devices were priced just high enough that they were more costly than solar cells, so they became relegated to a niche market, and the factory here went out of business and was shut down. As I opened the side panel on the large machine, I lifted out a small appliance hardly larger than a microwave oven. "Is this it?" I asked. "Yes," replied Glactyl, "but be careful, it is quite delicate." As I lifted the device onto my shoulder, I commented, "It seems like such a waste." But it was a necessary one. As I've explained before, the trade guild rules under which I operate are quite specific about what technology I can sell on primitive planets like yours. For instance, I can't sell anything that would disrupt your society. So I can't introduce or sell things that could produce unlimited free energy or matter duplicators like that one. I also can't kill intelligent beings or make devices that are specifically designed to do so. That includes not only people on this planet, but also primates and other sapient beings like pigs, elephants, whales, and dolphins. Finally, I am prohibited from revealing specific technologies that the galactic community has decided that you humans must develop on your own. That includes things like space travel, the ability to speed up or slow down, and things like immortality, teleportation, antimatter, and exotic matter. To be honest, I am stretching the rules a bit when I sell devices that your civilization cannot make. But even then, I can only do so in limited quantities. That's why this operation had to be terminated. It made us a lot of money, but it's time to move on. Turning, I started walking back to Glactyl's ship. "So, where are we off to now? Are we going to close down all the other product lines too?" "Eventually," said Glactyl. "But some will run for a while longer. The slick shoes, for instance, will remain on the market for a couple more months, but people are already discovering that the vibrations from the shoes damage smooth surfaces like marble or tile, and they are already being banned in many places. Eventually, sales will drop off and the product will fade away, as many novelty items do. When that time comes, the factory making them will shut down, just like this one." "Will all the items that you've marketed fail like that?" "Most of them. We are still selling those sticky gloves that let you climb up a wall like your comic book superheroes, but those sales will drop off as the novelty fades as well. In another case, people will soon discover that the spray-on thermal insulator that cannot burn is really an organic compound that decays over time, so they'll decide that it won't be suitable to use as insulation for buildings. When sales drop there, we will simply sell the patent to some company that wants the little business that remains. Only a few of the items that I offer will remain after I leave. As I said, we will sell the patents for some products. Others will be taken over or regulated out of existence. The delta wave simulator we introduced a few months ago that induces deep dreamless sleep will become regulated by the FDA by the end of the year. The vibrating knife that can cut through steel will also be outlawed because it can even cut through police body armor. New laws have already been proposed. The greatest sales have been to gangs and criminal organizations anyway. "So the things you sell don't last long?" I asked. "For the most part, that's true. Remember, I'm not allowed to disrupt your society or your world, so I tend to market things that have short lifetimes. Sadly, I am required to tie up all loose ends and minimize the impact that I will have had here. I am reminded of a song I heard while learning your language. It was about a gambler who said you needed to know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em. He was talking about a card game, but the same lesson applies here." As we approached Glactyl's ship, he lowered the invisibility screen that hid it from view. Although I had flown in it several times, I was still awed by it and impressed. It rose more than 5 stories high and roughly resembled a teardrop in shape, but I could tell it was old. I could see where it had been patched in places, where shiny metal juxtaposed older, less burnished sections. Near the entryway, at the end of the embarkation ramp, was a logo or symbol of some kind, but it was faded and it was obvious that the most current insignia had been painted over several older emblems. The ship looked like it had been through a lot, but I didn't say anything because I knew that the life of a traveling salesman probably wasn't an easy one. As Glactyl slowly climbed the ramp, he called back, saying, "Put that in an empty slot in the cargo bay and don't dawdle. We have 2 more places to reach before we're done today." After I entered the ship, the ramp retracted and the entryway behind me shrank down to a tiny circle and disappeared. Even before I stowed the alien equipment, I felt the ship rise into the air and head off to our next destination. The end of Phase 2 of Glactyl's plan was anticlimactic. After closing down all his companies, he sold his controlling shares of stock back to the Parado Group. That way, they could once again pull their own strings without outside interference. The company's business had boomed under Glactyl's guidance, and they bought him out for an even $1 billion. That was a tenfold return on his original investment a year earlier. Even though I no longer had any interest in her business anymore, Evelyn continued to call me periodically. But I avoided her. Thanks to the compeller, I think she had become infatuated with me, but Glactyl assured me that its effects would eventually wear off. She wasn't my type anyway. Her matronly middle school teacher motif always put me off, regardless of how charming she tried to be. Overall, Glactyl was happy, and I was ecstatic with our profit-sharing agreement. Additionally, he had garnered more than $7 billion from the dozen different products that he had marketed through the ad agency. He had also sold the patents on 3 other products for $1 billion more. He had even managed to sell the patents on those thermocouples, knowing that the buyers would not develop the technology to produce them for another century or so. But the buyers were convinced that they could reverse engineer the process that made them. His greatest deal, however, was tricking the government into paying him not to release some of the products that he had tentatively announced. In the first instance, he made it known that he planned to build quantum computers, but the NSA approached me and threatened to arrest me, explaining that the technology was classified. I countered by explaining that I wasn't the one planning on patenting the new devices. It was an overseas company that I merely represented, and they weren't planning to file in the US, but rather that they would be filing in China instead. The NSA then quietly paid us a flat $1 billion not to do so. They already had quantum computers, and they wanted to retain their monopoly. In a final coup, Glactyl showed a new defensive technology to the US Army. He demonstrated an energy coil that created a force field, which absorbed all kinetic energy. You could drop bombs on such a shielded bunker all day, and it wouldn't even be scratched. What he didn't explain to them was that when the field coil was turned off, that it discharged, releasing all the energy that had been absorbed. The release was instantaneous and explosive. The Army, however, was certain that they could work out the bugs. Later, however, Glactyl explained to me that they wouldn't be able to fix it. It was a dilemma that had baffled scientists in Glactyl society for centuries. Ultimately, the field coil only destroyed what it protected, and it was only useful as a bomb. In the end, my alien friend achieved his goal of turning his $100 million into $10 billion in a single year. My 10% portion amounted to an even $1 billion, and based on calculations that I did, I decided there was no way I could ever spend all that money in my lifetime, even if I tried. I later found that the Parado Group had suffered another scandal. Someone had discovered their use of the compeller in their marketing campaigns, and their new clients dumped them faster than a pregnant mistress. This time, there was no benefactor to save them from bankruptcy, and they closed their doors for good. I worried about Evelyn calling me again, but thankfully, she never did. After every loose end had been dealt with, Glactyl and I celebrated on the bridge of his ship, as we gazed down on the earth far below and chatted comfortably. I sipped an expensive brand of scotch from a glass made of cut crystal. Glactyl drank from a long-stemmed glass that reeked of formaldehyde. He had donned yet another disguise, this time dressed as a character from an old theatrical opera. Wearing a white mask and a full cape, he was proud of this selection and felt quite distinguished. After a pause, he said, "That worked out quite well, but I think it's time that I explained the final phase of my plan." "There's more?" I asked in surprise. I guess I must have misunderstood him when he said he just wanted to make $10 billion. "Yes," he replied. "Haven't you wondered what I'm really here for? I mean, I can manufacture almost anything. What do you think would be valuable enough for me to come here to your planet to barter for?" "Well," I stammered, "I just figured you just wanted to make money." "But what good is money to me way out there away from your little planet?" he said, gesturing at the stars surrounding us. "To you, gold and diamonds are precious, but to me, they are as valuable as sand. What do you think you have here on Earth that would be of any value to someone with my technology and capabilities? I don't know, I said. Hadn't really thought about it before. I shrugged and said, all this time you've seemed awfully interested in making as much money as you can. But if money doesn't mean anything to you, then why do you want to make so much of it? Glactyl leaned close and spoke almost in a whisper. Because with enough of your money, I can use it to buy what I really want. I can pay people to bring me what I truly desire from this world, so I don't have to chase it down and gather by myself. Now that I am wealthy enough on your world, I can start phase 3 of my plan. Then, when I am done, I will be, by galactic standards, far richer than I have ever dreamed. Now, I was mesmerized. So, I asked, what are you going to do? Well, first, he said, I am going to use my $10 billion to purchase every major slaughterhouse in North America. What? I asked, in utter shock and surprise. Why would you want to do that? Glactyl grinned, and then he finally explained. The Traveling Salesman continues in Part 3, when Bob and Glactyl spend their $10 billion to achieve Glactyl's true objective. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons here at Untold Tales, and we would love to hear from you. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, letting us know what your favorite story has been in our 3 seasons of storytelling so far. We'd love to continue shaping our podcast with stories that you'd like to hear. As always, thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.